You're breathing wrong right now. Every single human being alive is breathing wrong, eating wrong, and thinking about trees in a way that is so fundamentally backwards that if Feynman were standing next to you this very second, he would grab your shoulder and say, "Stop. Just stop, because what you think you know about where life comes from is not just incomplete. It is the opposite of the truth." Think about that for a moment. The opposite. There is a tree outside your window or down the street, or in a park you walked past last Tuesday without giving it a second glance. It might be an oak. It might be a pine. It might be something unremarkable and brown and boring to anyone who has not yet been handed the right question. And that tree, that enormous, heavy, solid, seemingly earthbound structure, weighs hundreds of kilograms, maybe thousands, and almost none of that weight, almost none of that wood and bark and root and branch came from the ground. Almost none of it came from the soil you can touch with your hands. Where did it come from then? If you feel a small electric jolt of confusion right now, good. That jolt is the beginning of science. That is the feeling Feynman chased his entire life. And he would tell you, without apology, that most people spend their whole existence running away from exactly that sensation. They feel it, and they call it discomfort, and they go back to their phones. He felt it, and he called it the most beautiful thing in the universe, and he spent decades pulling on that thread until the whole sweater of reality came undone in his hands. So stay with that jolt, because we are about to pull on a thread that connects a tree in your backyard to the death of stars, to the silence of the cosmos, to the terrifying possibility that intelligence itself might be the universe's rarest and most fragile accident. And the answer to where trees really come from is not just a biology lesson. It is a philosophical detonation. It is the kind of insight that, once it lands, changes the way you see every breath you take, every meal you eat, every star you squint at on a clear night. In a moment, we are going to talk about why the answer to this question about trees is also the answer to a much darker question. Why might the universe be so catastrophically silent? I will come back to that because the connection is more direct than you think, and when it clicks, it will genuinely frighten you in the best possible way. But first, picture this. It is a Thursday evening in late September, the kind of evening where the air has just started to carry that first cool edge of autumn, and the sky goes from orange to purple to a deep, almost arrogant blue. You're standing in a garden, or maybe a park, or maybe just a patch of grass beside a road, and you're looking at a tree, a real one, not a photograph, not a diagram in a textbook. A living, breathing, enormously complex biological machine that has been quietly doing something miraculous every single day. And you have never once stopped to ask how. You probably learned in school, or assumed without being taught, that trees eat dirt, that they pull their substance from the ground, that the soil is the source, the pantry, the engine. It seems obvious, right? You plant a seed in soil, you water it, it grows. The soil must be the thing. That is the common sense's story, the one that feels safe and settled and closed. But common sense, Feynman would remind you with that particular mischievous glint in his eye, is just the collection of prejudices acquired by age 18. No, the soil is not the source. And that realization, that single overturning of an assumption you never even knew you were carrying, is the doorway into something much larger, much stranger, and infinitely more important than a biology fact. It is a doorway into understanding what life actually is, where matter actually comes from, and why the cosmos around us is either full of life we cannot hear, or empty in a way that should keep you awake at night. If you are watching this right now and you feel that pull, that curiosity that refuses to sit still, then you're exactly the kind of mind this channel exists for. Hit subscribe, not because some algorithm told you to, but because you are about to join a crew of people who decided at some point to stop sleepwalking through the universe and start actually looking at it. The people in this community ask the same questions Feynman asked. They look at a tree and see a cosmic mystery. They look at the night sky and feel something between wonder and vertigo. If that is you, you belong here. Leave a comment right now. Tell us, where are you watching from, and what is the last thing in nature that made you stop and genuinely wonder? Because the answers in that comment section are every single time extraordinary. Now back to the tree. Back to the question that is quietly undermining everything. Feynman told a story once about his father. A remarkable man who took young Richard on walks and pointed at birds and said things like, "That bird over there, do you know what it is called in a dozen different languages?" And even if you know all those names, you still know nothing about the bird. You know the label, not the thing? His father understood that the name of a thing is not the knowledge of a thing, and that most of human education is teaching children the names while leaving the things themselves untouched, mysterious, and alive. The name of the process by which a tree builds itself is photosynthesis. Most people know that word. Most people could write it on a test and get the mark. But how many people have actually sat with what it means? How many have felt the full weight of it? Here's the weight of it. A tree, over the course of its life, accumulates an enormous mass. Hundreds of kilograms of wood, of cellulose, of lignin, of complex organic molecules. Where does that mass come from? A botanist named Jan Baptist van Helmont asked exactly this question in the early 1600s, and he did something elegant and simple. He weighed a pot of soil, planted a willow tree in it, watered it for 5 years with nothing but rainwater, then weighed the soil again. The tree had gained roughly 77 kilograms. The soil had lost almost nothing, a few grams, essentially nothing. So the tree did not come from the soil. Van Helmont, being a man of his time, concluded it must have come from the water. Reasonable. Wrong, but reasonable. It took another 150 years and the work of people like Jan and Hinyahouse for the actual answer to crystallize the tree comes from the air. Yes, the air. The invisible, weightless, seemingly substanceless air you are breathing right now. A tree is, in the most literal and physical sense, solidified air. It takes carbon dioxide, a gas, a thing you cannot see or hold or weigh in your hands without special equipment, and it transforms that gas into solid wood, into cellulose, into the bark and the branches and the roots and the leaves. It uses sunlight, it uses water, it splits those molecules, it rebuilds them, and it locks atmospheric carbon into rigid physical structure. A tree is a machine that eats light and breathes air and turns both into matter. You can knock on with your knuckles. Think about that. Knock, knock. That is air. Solidified, organized, structured air, held together by the energy of a star 93 million miles away. And now, here is where Feynman would lean forward and his voice would drop just slightly, because this is where it gets beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. That carbon in the air, the carbon the tree is pulling in and building itself from, where did that carbon come from? And here's where the story gets cosmic. Really, genuinely, structurally cosmic. Carbon was not present when the universe began. After the Big Bang, the universe was hydrogen and helium and a little bit of lithium. That is it. That is the whole menu. The universe started simple, almost embarrassingly simple, and everything else, every other element, every atom of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and iron that makes up you and the tree and the ground and every living thing that has ever existed, all of that was forged inside stars. Stars are nuclear furnaces. They take hydrogen, they crush it under incomprehensible gravitational pressure. They fuse it into helium, and then they fuse that into carbon and oxygen and nitrogen, and up the periodic table they go, building complexity out of simplicity, building the ingredients of everything from almost nothing. And when those stars when they exhaust their fuel and collapse and explode in supernovas of staggering violence, they scatter those elements across space. They seed the cosmos with the raw materials of chemistry, of biology, of thought. So, when a tree pulls carbon dioxide from the air, it is not just doing chemistry. It is completing a journey that began inside a star that died billions of years before the Earth existed. That carbon has been on a voyage across cosmic time and space, and it has arrived finally in a leaf, in a branch, in the wood of a tree that you walked past on a Thursday in September without giving it a second glance. Punto. Let that sit for a moment. You are made of the same stuff. Every atom of carbon in your body was forged in a stellar furnace. You are not metaphorically stardust. You are literally, chemically, physically, the scattered remains of dead stars. When Feynman said that the atoms of our body have been in many places before, he was not being poetic. He was being precise. Those atoms have been in interstellar gas clouds, in the cores of stars, in the rubble of supernovas, in the primitive oceans of an early Earth, in the bodies of organisms that lived and died hundreds of millions of years before anything resembling a human ever walked this planet. And now they are here, organized in a particular way, temporarily reading these words or hearing this voice, and wondering about trees. Is that not the most astonishing thing you have heard today? Now here's where Feynman would pause, and he would look at you with that slightly unsettling directness he had, and he would ask a question that sounds simple but is actually a trap. If the universe is so good at making the ingredients of life, if stars routinely forge carbon and scatter it across galaxies, if the chemistry of life seems almost inevitable once those ingredients are assembled, then why? Why in a universe of hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars? Why does every telescope we point at the sky return nothing but silence? Why are we alone? Or are we? And which answer is more frightening? I will tell you something, and I want you to hold it carefully because it is genuinely unsettling. In a moment, I will walk you through what the silence of the universe might actually mean, and the most credible scientific answer to that question is not comforting. It is not the answer you want, but it is the kind of answer Feynman would insist you face, because he believed deeply and completely that the pleasure of finding things out is always greater than the comfort of not knowing, even when what you find out is terrifying. But first, let us stay with the tree a little longer, because there is one more layer to this that most people never reach, and it changes everything. The process by which a tree converts carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen using sunlight. That process, photosynthesis, is not a simple chemical reaction. It is not like dissolving salt in water or burning paper. It is a process that at its most fundamental level depends on quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics. The physics of the impossibly small. The physics of superposition and entanglement and behavior that defies every intuition you have ever developed by living in a world of solid objects and predictable motions. Inside the chloroplast of a leaf, inside those tiny green structures that give plants their color, there are molecules called antenna complexes, and they capture photons of sunlight, and then something happens that, for decades, nobody could explain with classical physics. The energy from those photons moves through the antenna complex to the reaction center with an efficiency that is close to perfect. Nearly 100% of the captured energy reaches its destination without being lost as heat. In any ordinary system, any large classical system, that would be impossible. Energy moves through complex systems and dissipates, it scatters. It is lost. That is thermodynamics, that is the second law. But in a leaf, in the green structure of a living plant, the energy does not scatter. It moves with quantum coherence. The photon's energy exists in a superposition of multiple pathways simultaneously. It explores all possible routes at once, and it finds the most efficient one. A leaf is performing quantum computation. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every algae in every ocean on this planet. Life at its most basic and widespread level is a quantum phenomenon. No, this is not a metaphor. This is not loose language borrowed from physics to sound impressive. This is measured, verified, Quantum biology is a real field, and it is showing us that life did not just arise in a universe that happens to have quantum mechanics. Life is built on quantum mechanics. Life exploits the deepest and strangest properties of physical reality to do what it does. And Feynman would absolutely love this because it connects his two great passions, the weirdness of quantum mechanics and the complexity of biology. He would say, look at what nature figured out. Before any human being had ever written the Schrödinger equation, before anyone had ever dreamed of quantum computing, a single-celled organism in a primordial ocean was already running quantum algorithms to harvest starlight. Nature got there first. Nature always gets there first, which brings us back to the silence. If life is this ingenious, if it exploits quantum mechanics with such elegance, if the ingredients for it are scattered across the entire universe by dying stars, if the chemistry seems almost inevitable, if the physics actively cooperates, then where is everybody? This is the Fermi paradox, named after Enrico Fermi, who may or may not have said it quite the way the story goes, but the question is real and it has never been adequately answered. The universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Stars similar to our sun have been around for billions of years before our star even formed. If life arises wherever conditions allow, And if even a tiny fraction of civilizations develop the ability to travel or communicate across interstellar distances, then the galaxy should be full of signals, full of visitors, full of some detectable evidence of intelligence. And yet, silence complete, unbroken cosmic silence. We have been listening for decades. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the great radio telescopes, the decades of sky surveys, the careful analysis of electromagnetic frequencies that a technological civilization might use, and the universe has answered with nothing. Not a whisper, not a pattern, not a single unambiguous signal from anywhere beyond our own civilization. How do you explain that? Here's where it gets genuinely dark, and I want you to lean in because this is the part that Feynman would not let you skip past with a comfortable wave of the hand. There's a concept called the Great Filter. It was articulated by the economist Robin Hanson, and it is one of the most disturbing ideas in the history of human thought. The Great Filter is a stage, or perhaps multiple stages, in the development of a civilization that is so difficult to survive, so statistically lethal, that almost no species makes it through. It is the explanation for why the universe is silent. Somewhere between the formation of stars and the emergence of a spacefaring civilization, there is a filter. A bottleneck so severe that it catches almost everything. And the terrifying question is, have we passed it, or is it ahead of us? Think about what that means. If the Great Filter is behind us, if it was something in our past, the emergence of the first self-replicating molecule, or the leap from prokaryota to eukaryota, or the development of multicellular life, or the emergence of complex brains, then we are lucky. Extraordinarily, improbably, against all odds lucky, we made it through something that almost nothing else did. And that would explain the silence. The universe is not full of life because the path from chemistry to civilization is almost impossibly difficult. And we happen to walk it. That would be good news in a strange and humbling way. But what if the Great Filter is not behind us? What if the filter is ahead? What if every civilization that reaches our level of development, the level at which you can split the atom and sequence a genome and build a global communications network, what if every civilization that reaches this exact point then destroys itself? What if the filter is nuclear war, or engineered pathogens, or artificial intelligence that cannot be controlled, or climate collapse, or simply the tragic tendency of intelligent beings to prioritize short-term comfort over long-term survival? What if we are not the survivors of the Great Filter, but the next candidates for it? And here is the paradox that would make Feynman both furious and deeply sad. The paradox that cuts right to the heart of why the tree question and the cosmos question are the same question. The very intelligence that allows us to discover quantum biology and stellar nucleosynthesis and the Fermi paradox is also the intelligence that builds weapons capable of ending the civilization that discovered those things. The capacity for wonder and the capacity for self-destruction appear to come as a package deal in intelligent beings. At least they have so far. Every day without exception, there are people who choose to diminish science rather than engage with it, who choose comfortable myths over uncomfortable truths, who look at a tree and see furniture rather than solidified starlight, who look at the night sky and feel nothing. And Feynman would say, and he did say repeatedly in different ways, that the loss of wonder is not just an aesthetic tragedy, it is a survival risk. A civilization that stops being curious about nature stops being equipped to protect itself from nature. And nature, the cosmos, does not negotiate. It does not make exceptions. It does not care what you believe. A gamma ray burst from a dying star a few thousand light years away would sterilize a hemisphere. An asteroid of modest size would collapse civilization. A pandemic with a slightly higher transmission rate than any we have seen would do what no war has managed to do. And our only defense against any of these things is science. Not prayer. Not politics. Not tradition. Science, the disciplined, humble, rigorous, endlessly curious practice of asking what is actually true and then testing the answer. This is not a political statement. Feynman had no patience for politics, and neither should this argument. This is a statement about physics, about probability, about the cold arithmetic of a universe that is 4.5 billion years older than the Earth and will continue for trillions of years after the last star burns out. In that context, a civilization that abandons scientific literacy is not just making a cultural mistake. It is, probabilistically, signing its own extinction notice. And now I want to tell you about someone who understood this. not as an abstract idea, but as a living, daily reality. I want to tell you about what it looked like from the outside, because the Great Filter is not just a cosmic abstraction. It plays out at every scale, including the human one. It was the third week of November, a few years after the Second World War, when a young student sat in a lecture hall at Cornell University and listened to a man who was clearly not entirely comfortable with the formality of academic presentation. The man paced. He waved his hands. He said things like, the whole thing is more interesting than I can possibly tell you in an hour. He drew pictures on the board that looked like cartoons and turned out to be the foundations of quantum electrodynamics, a theory so accurate that Feynman himself compared it to measuring the distance from Los Angeles to New York to within the width of a human hair. The student, whose name was not famous and does not need to be, went home that evening and sat at a window and looked at the moon, and later told his sister that for the first time in his life, the moon did not look like a rock in the sky. It looked like a destination. It looked like evidence. Evidence that the universe was not indifferent to being understood, but was in some deep and inexplicable way built to be understood, built to yield its secrets to the right kind of patient, curious, systematic attention. That student went on to do work in materials science that contributed, modestly but genuinely, to satellite design. He never became famous. He never won a prize. But on a Tuesday in October of his 61st year, when the first photographs from the James Webb Space Telescope were released, photographs of galaxies that existed less than 1 billion years after the Big Bang, he wept. Not from sadness, from something that does not have an adequate name in English, from the feeling of being briefly in contact with the true scale of things. His daughter, who was sitting next to him when he wept, described it later as the most important moment of her relationship with her father. Not his achievements, not his career, not the tangible accomplishments of his professional life. The moment he wept at a photograph of the early universe. Because in that moment, she saw that he had never stopped being the student in the lecture hall. He had never lost the thread. He had carried it his entire life, quietly, persistently, and it had made him, she said, genuinely alive in a way that most people are not. That is what wonder does. That is what the tree question, answered correctly, is actually about. Coming up, I want to give you 3 things. The practical mental model Feynman actually used to stay connected to wonder even when the mathematics got difficult. The specific scientific fact about photosynthesis that will permanently change how you see every green thing you ever look at. And the one question about the cosmos that, if you ask it regularly, will do more for your intellectual life than almost anything else you could do. These are not abstract promises. These are tools, and I will get to them because what is behind them will genuinely surprise you. But first, let us push further into the darkness, because we are not done with the Great Filter, and the next layer of it is one that almost nobody talks about. Here is the thing about the silence of the universe that is most unsettling, most philosophically vertiginous, most likely to make you feel the floor shift beneath you. If you really let it in, the silence is not just the absence of radio signals, it is the absence of any sign of large-scale engineering anywhere. A civilization millions of years more advanced than ours. And such civilization should exist if intelligence arises regularly, would not communicate by radio. Radio is the technology of a very young species. An ancient civilization would have moved on to things we cannot even imagine yet, and in doing so, it would leave marks. A sufficiently advanced civilization might dismantle planets to build megastructures. It might rearrange the orbits of stars. It might, over millions of years, restructure entire regions of the galaxy to serve its purposes. These things would be detectable, not because we would understand what we were seeing, but because we would see something unusual, something that does not fit the patterns of natural astrophysics. And we see nothing. We see a universe that looks exactly as though intelligence has never touched it. Exactly as though every civilization that has ever arisen has either stayed quiet or stayed small or simply stopped existing before it had the chance to leave a mark. What does that tell you? No. Do not rush past that question. What does it actually tell you? Feynman would say it tells you something is wrong with one of your assumptions. Either life does not arise as readily as the chemistry suggests, or intelligence does not develop as readily as the biology suggests, or civilizations do not last as long as we hope, or something stops them. Every time, almost without exception. And the most intellectually honest position The position that Feynman's epistemology would force you toward is that we do not know which one. We genuinely, honestly, with all of our science and all of our telescopes and all of our mathematics, do not know why we are alone. We do not know if the silence is a statistical accident or a death sentence. But here's the thing about not knowing that Feynman spent his whole career trying to make people understand. Not knowing is not the same as having no information. Not knowing precisely and clearly and without pretending otherwise is the beginning of knowing. It is the necessary precondition for discovery. A civilization that claims to know things it does not know is not a confident civilization. It is a fraudulent one, because when reality contradicts the claim, and reality always eventually contradicts false claims, the people whose identity was built on the claim break. See. This is the connection between the tree and the cosmos, and it is not metaphorical. It is structural. When you think you know where a tree comes from, when the answer feels settled and closed and obvious, you stop looking. You stop asking. You walk past the tree without seeing it. And the universe is full of trees, full of phenomena that look obvious and are actually extraordinary, full of surfaces beneath which the most astonishing machinery is running, and a civilization that has trained itself to stop looking at surfaces will not see the machinery until the machinery breaks. The carbon cycle is breaking right now. The carbon that trees have been pulling from the atmosphere and locking into wood and soil for hundreds of millions of years. The carbon that took stellar explosions to create, the carbon that has been cycling through. The biosphere in a slow, complex, self-regulating dance for geological epochs. We are releasing it faster than at any point in the last tens of millions of years. We are unlocking it, turning solid carbon back into atmospheric gas, running the tree equation backwards at speed, and the question of whether that is survivable is not a political question. It is a physics question. It is a chemistry question. It is an atmospheric science question. And the answer that the physics and chemistry and atmospheric science give is it depends entirely on how quickly we understand what we are doing and choose to do something different, which depends entirely on whether we remain a civilization that values understanding, which depends on whether we remain curious, which brings us finally to the tools, the practical mental models, the things Feynman actually did to stay connected to wonder and to rigorous thinking simultaneously. The first is what you could call the ladder of why. Feynman described it in several interviews and lectures, and it is deceptively simple. When you encounter any phenomenon, any object or event or observation, you ask why. And when you get an answer, you ask why again. And you keep going, not forever, because at some point you will reach the edge of current human knowledge, and there you should stop and sit with the honest answer, we do not know yet. But most people stop at the first or second rung of the ladder, and that is where they miss everything. A child asks, why is the sky blue? And the answer is, because of how air molecules scatter light. Why do they scatter it that way? Because of how electromagnetic waves interact with particles much smaller than their wavelengths. Why does that interaction favor shorter wavelengths? Because of quantum electrodynamics, because of the nature of the photon-electron interaction, because of the deep structure of space-time and matter. And at that point, you're not answering a question about the sky anymore. You are at the frontier of physics. You have traveled from a Tuesday afternoon in a backyard to the edge of human knowledge in 4 or 5 steps. That is the ladder of why, and every phenomenon has one, and every single rung is more interesting than the one below it. The second tool is what Feynman called the pleasure of finding things out, and it is both a practice and a philosophy. The practice is this: when you encounter something you do not understand before you reach for an explanation, spend a moment just sitting with the not understanding. Feel it, let it be uncomfortable, because that discomfort is not a problem to be solved by grabbing the nearest explanation. That discomfort is the signal that something interesting is nearby. The philosophy is this: the universe is not obligated to make sense to you. It is not designed for your intuition. And the places where your intuition fails are precisely the places where the universe is doing something remarkable. Quantum mechanics fails your intuition. General relativity fails your intuition. The fact that a tree is made of air fails your intuition. Every one of those failures is a gift, because every one of them is an invitation to understand something real. The third tool is the hardest one, and it is the one that Feynman himself struggled with, that any honest scientist struggles with. The practice of changing your mind when the evidence demands it, not as a defeat, not as an embarrassing retreat, as a victory, as proof that you are doing it right. Feynman said if you thought that science was certain, well, that is just an error on your part. Science is not certain. Science is the best method we have for reducing our uncertainty, but it is not a collection of final answers. It is a collection of best current answers, always provisional, always open to revision, always hungry for better data. A civilization that mistakes the provisional nature of science for weakness is a civilization that will replace science with something that offers false certainty. And false certainty in a cosmos with gamma-ray bursts and asteroids and immersion, pandemics and climate dynamics, and all the other ways the universe can end a species without warning or apology. False certainty is not comfort. It is catastrophe waiting. Escucha, here is the question I promise you. The one that will do more for your intellectual life than almost anything else if you ask it regularly. Not once, regularly. The question is this: what am I looking at right now that I have always assumed I understood, but have never actually examined? Ask that about a tree. Ask it about the sky. Ask it about the food on your plate, the material your clothes are made of, the process by which your own brain is generating the experience of reading or hearing these words right now. Every single one of those things, every one will open into a depth that most people never suspect is there. Every ordinary object and everyday process is a portal into physics, into chemistry, into evolutionary biology, into the history of the cosmos. The food on your plate is made of carbon that was once in the atmosphere, that was once in the ocean, that was once in a living organism, that was once in the crust of the earth, that was once in the core of a star. Your clothes are made of fibers either grown by plants that were doing quantum computing in their leaves, or synthesized from petroleum that is the compressed remains of organisms that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. Your brain is running on electrochemical signals that follow the same quantum mechanical rules as everything else in the universe, and it is doing so with a complexity that we still, with all of our neuroscience and all of our computing power, do not fully understand. You're not a person looking at the universe from outside. You are the universe looking at itself. You are the way the cosmos becomes conscious of its own existence. That is not poetry. That is the most accurate description of what you are that current science can provide. And here is why that matters for the Fermi paradox, why it matters for the Great Filter, why it matters for the question of whether we are going to make it as a species, if consciousness is rara, if the path from chemistry to a being that can ask where trees come from is genuinely as improbable as the silence of the universe suggests. Then what we have here, this fragile, temporary, carbon-based, quantum biological, star-forged capacity for wonder and understanding is possibly the most precious thing in the observable universe. And we are choosing in many places at many scales to treat it as disposable. Feynman knew this. He did not say it in those terms because he was a physicist, not a prophet, and he was suspicious of anyone who claimed prophetic authority. But in his lectures, in his interviews, in the way he spoke about science and ignorance and the danger of not knowing things, there was always this undercurrent of urgency. Not panic, not despair. Urgency. The kind of urgency that comes from genuinely understanding that time is limited and that there are things worth understanding before it runs out. He said once, "I would rather have questions that cannot be answered than answers that cannot be questioned." And that sentence, simple as it sounds, is the complete antidote to the Great Filter. Because the civilizations that die, if the Great Filter hypothesis is correct, are not the ones that ask too many questions. They are the ones that stop asking. The ones that find an answer, any answer, and to see it is enough. The ones that look at a tree and see furniture. The ones that look at the sky and see wallpaper. The ones that forget that they are made of stars. And this is the revelation that Feynman would want you to carry out of this conversation. The thing he would want you to feel, not just intellectually, but physically, in the body that is itself a temporary arrangement of stellar debris. The universe is not hostile to life. It is not designed to produce a life. It is not obligated to protect life, but it is structured at its deepest levels in a way that makes life possible, that makes complexity possible, that makes consciousness possible, and the fact that it has done so here on this small rocky planet. Orbiting an unremarkable star in the outer arm of an ordinary galaxy is either a miracle of probability or evidence of something we do not yet understand. Either way, it is not something to be wasted. The tree outside your window is not drawing from the dirt, it is drawing from the sky. It is pulling invisible gas from the air you breathe and turning it into solid wood using quantum physics, powered by a nuclear fusion reactor 93 million miles away. It is completing the journey of atoms that began in the core of a star that died before the Earth existed. It is doing all of this silently, continuously, without any awareness of what it is doing, without any capacity to appreciate the magnificence of the process it embodies. You have that capacity? You right now are the only thing in the known universe that can look at a tree and understand what it is actually doing. You are the only thing that can trace the carbon back to the star, that can feel the weight of cosmic time, that can ask why and keep asking until the answer touches the edge of human knowledge. That is not a small thing. That is, if the great filter hypothesis is correct and intelligence is rare, possibly the single most extraordinary fact in the observable cosmos. So use it at the end day. Use it every day. Ask the ladder of why. Sit with the discomfort of not knowing. Change your mind when the evidence demands it. Look at the tree and see the star. Look at the sky and feel the vertigo of on a scale. Look at the silence of the universe and let it frighten you, not into paralysis, but into the kind of urgency that makes you want to understand everything before the time runs out. Because the time does run out for individuals, for civilizations, for stars, for everything. But the questions, the real questions, the ones Feynman spent his life asking, the ones that begin with, where does a tree actually come from? Those questions are bigger than any individual answer. They are the thread that connects chemistry to cosmology, biology to physics, the leaf on the tree to the death of a star 1 billion years ago and 1 billion light years away. They are the thread that, if you pull it, unravels the comfortable, closed, settled version of reality and replaces it with something far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more worth being alive to witness. Pull the thread. The universe has been waiting for you to pull the thread, and it does not ask anything in return except that you keep asking, keep looking, keep refusing to mistake the label for the thing. Keep refusing to walk past the tree without wondering what it actually is. That is all Feynman ever asked. That is all science has ever asked. And it is, if we are honest about what the silence of the cosmos might mean, the most important thing a human being can do with the brief and improbable gift of being conscious in a universe that mostly is not. So here you are, standing next to that tree on a Thursday evening in late September, the sky going from orange to purple to a deep and arrogant blue. And you know now what you did not know before. You know that the tree is not eating dirt. You know it is eating light and air, doing quantum mechanics in its leaves, completing the journey of atoms forged in a dead star, adding one more brief chapter to a story that began before the Earth existed. And you know that you, standing next to it, are doing the same. You're made of the same atoms. You're running the same quantum processes. You are the same kind of temporary, improbable, magnificent arrangement of stellar material with one extraordinary difference. You can know it. You can trace the thread all the way back and all the way forward, from the Big Bang to the heat death of the universe, and you can stand in the middle of that incomprehensible span of time and feel precisely and justly what it means to be here. Feynman felt that every day. Every single day without exception, he felt it, and he said it was enough. That the feeling of understanding, even partial understanding, even understanding that raises more questions than it answers, was the richest experience a human life could contain. He was right. He was on this completely and undeniably right. And the tree outside your window is the proof.